The 2010s is pretty much where Hollywood just totally lost its mind. Budgets got insanely huge, and studios started throwing ridiculous amounts of money at movies that literally nobody was asking for. Now, I'm not going to waste time on stuff everybody knows bombed, like Cats or Green Lantern. Instead, I'm looking at flops so embarrassing, so stupidly pathetic, Hollywood just straight up pretended they never happened after losing millions. This was supposed to be some kind of inspiring true-life story about this guy named Sam Childers, who literally called himself Machine Gun Preacher, basically a drug dealer turned religious nutjob who decided it was his mission to liberate kids from warlords in Sudan by shooting guns at everybody. You can't make this up. Well, except he kind of did. Lionsgate had the movie first, but even they didn't want it. Relativity picked it up instead, made it their big debut release. They hyped it up, sent Childers on media tours, and tried to pitch him as some kind of hero. A former scumbag drug dealer who found Jesus and went to Sudan to set up an orphanage and took up arms to liberate children from a militant group. But the more people learned about the real guy, the more obvious it was he was full of it. Journalists started calling him out for lying about his past. Stories came out about his orphanage, where children were neglected, ill and malnourished, and the locals wanted him to leave. Yet he's a man on a divine mission in this god-awful movie. So instead of awards buzz, it just tanked completely. They opened this thing in only 4 theaters, made barely over $11,000 per theater. Nobody showed up, expanded it to 33 theaters the next week, made even less money. At its biggest, it played in just 93 theaters and made about $500,000 total. Overseas wasn't much better. Made a pathetic $3 million across a bunch of countries. Big places like France or Italy didn't even put it in theaters. Gerard Butler didn't exactly bounce back either. His next 2 movies bombed just as bad. Here's another one nobody asked for, The Thing, and not Carpenter's classic. This was 2011, right when Hollywood decided every good movie ever needed a remake, reboot, or prequel. Producers Mark Abraham and Eric Newman found Carpenter's masterpiece, said, "We should totally mess with this." But then even they realized remaking The Thing is like vandalizing art, so they decided to do a prequel instead. Great call, guys. Once we realized there was a new story to tell, with the same characters and the same world, but from a very different point of view, we took it as a challenge. It's the story about the guys who are just ghosts in Carpenter's movie. They're already dead. But having Universal give us a chance to tell their story was irresistible. That's what producer Eric Newman said. Universal spent $38 million on this thing. They made the whole movie, then panicked, pulled it from release, and spent even more cash doing huge reshoots. Worst part is, they replaced all the cool practical effects they already filmed with bad CGI, because obviously that's what fans of The Thing wanted, right? Universal tried everything to push it. Big marketing, even made a theme park maze for Halloween Horror Nights. But nobody cared. Fans hated it. It bombed immediately. And now pretty much everybody pretends it doesn't exist, which is fair, honestly. Jared Leto and Diane Kruger star in a movie that tries really hard to be deep. It's about a guy named Nemo Nobody, who's the last mortal on Earth. He's 118 years old, he's telling different versions of his life story, exploring alternate realities, big ideas, multiverse, all that stuff. Interesting idea, right? Problem is, nobody wanted it. They spent $58 million making it, got completely rejected by Cannes, and their distributor panicked, recut it, and sent it off to Venice instead. And guess what? Still nobody wanted to buy it. So this thing sat around for 4 years with no US distributor, until Magnolia finally picked it up, basically for spare change. They figured, hey, Jared Leto's getting buzz for Dallas Buyers Club, maybe people will care. But no, they opened it in 4 empty theaters. First weekend, barely $1,600 total. That's literally $400 per theater. After 5 weeks, it made just over $3,000. That's it, $3,000 on a $58 million movie. Director says it's his proudest movie ever. Financially, it was a failure, but artistically speaking, I think it's the best thing I can do in my life. I bet investors loved hearing that. The budget for Third Person was $28 million. A Belgian company called Corson financed the whole thing, but turns out they were straight-up criminals. Their boss, a guy named Paul Brules, ended up arrested for fraud and money laundering. So yeah, actual crime paid for this movie. Good start. And you'd think it had a chance. Big stars like Liam Neeson, Olivia Wilde, Adrian Brody, a script by Paul Haggis who literally won an Oscar writing $1 Million Baby. They pre-sold it around the world. Everyone expected this big R-rated drama. But when people saw it at Toronto Film Festival, everyone realized it sucked completely. It's this weird three-part romance thing, jumping between couples in Rome, Paris, and New York. Sounds classy, right? But in reality, it's just slow, boring, pretentious nonsense. Critics hated it. Audiences ignored it completely, lost all its money. Basically, it feels like one of those indie student movies, but it cost $28 million. So, at some point after Avengers and Thor, everybody thought Chris Hemsworth could open anything. Michael Mann definitely did. Turns out, he was wrong. The whole idea was basically Chris Hemsworth as this genius hacker guy tracking cyber criminals all over the world, based loosely on some real-world hacking case. Sounded decent enough on paper. They filmed all over Malaysia, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and Legendary Pictures poured a ton of money into marketing. But when it finally came out, nobody showed up. Opening weekend was pathetic, less than $4 million. Critics thought it sucked. The trailers looked like garbage, seriously ugly footage. People just didn't care. By weekend number 3, it barely played anywhere. Legendary had to actually cancel its theatrical release in Australia because the American numbers were just that awful. Sent it straight to video instead. In the end, Legendary lost around $90 million on a movie that cost $70 million. One of the biggest disasters they've ever had. Not just disappointing, straight up embarrassing. Easily Michael Mann's worst movie. And yeah, I've seen The Keep. It's that bad. 2015 wasn't exactly a good year for Legendary in general. It lost over $500 million that year. Blackhat, Seventh Son, Steve Jobs, and Crimson Peak contributed to the loss. This one started as a star-studded romantic comedy, but ended up as a $25 million box office bomb and landed someone in prison. It was a complete mess behind the scenes. Started as a star-packed project called Nailed. Jessica Biel, Jake Gyllenhaal, even directed by David Russell. The financing was such a train wreck. People involved were straight up shady. Funds stopped showing up, production shut down like 9 times. Crew wouldn't even work until they got paid. Things got so bad they didn't even film the main scene, where Jessica Biel gets a nail stuck in her head, because they needed more cash from the shady guys behind the money. Obviously, the money never came. David Russell bailed on the whole thing, disowned it completely. Fast forward 7 years. Yeah, 7 years. Somebody finally buys this unfinished disaster, cuts it together without any help from the original filmmakers, retitles it Accidental Love, and dumps it straight to video. The theatrical release was pathetic, literally made under $5,000 total. And to top it all off, the guy behind all the shady financing, David Bergstein, got sentenced to prison for 8 years. So not only did nobody watch this movie, but somebody actually went to jail over it. I mean, come on. That's next level pathetic. Warner Brothers thought they had gold here. Ben Affleck fresh off Argo, adapting a Dennis Lehane novel. He's directing, writing, starring after Leonardo DiCaprio bowed out. Had a ton of Oscar buzz right from the start. Supposedly gonna cost over $100 million. Then, suddenly, the studio quietly drops the budget down to $65 million. So what happened there? Well, what happened is Warner Brothers saw nobody cared. This gangster movie got delayed so many times, Affleck went off to make Gone Girl and Batman before he finally shot this one. By the time it opened, nobody was hyped, reviews were average, Oscar buzz completely died. Box office opening was awful. The worst Affleck had since surviving Christmas, and that's saying something. Lost Warner Brothers, something like $75 million total. Embarrassing flop. No awards, no money, no nothing. It's like nobody even remembered it existed. The title makes you think maybe it's a fantasy movie, but actually it's a historical drama about the Spanish Civil War and the founder of Opus Dei. Somehow they scraped together $36 million for this thing. Even got some money from Spain. You got Charlie Cox, Yellowstone's Wes Bentley, some decent actors, but the whole thing feels like one of those bad TV movies your history teacher forces you to watch. Critics tore it apart. Audiences completely ignored it. Ended up losing over 30 million bucks. Barely got released anywhere. Director Roland Joffé was already on thin ice after Captivity. And this was the movie that finally flushed his career straight down the toilet. Went right into another straight-to-video mess called The Lovers right after. Honestly, the only interesting thing about There Be Dragons is how ridiculously misleading the title is. Not a single dragon in sight. Just a bunch of boring people talking about stuff nobody cares about. Total waste of time. This one started with Lawrence Kasanoff, a guy who ran Threshold Entertainment. His big idea was a movie where famous brand mascots come to life as animated characters. He somehow convinced big companies to let him use their mascots, like 80 of them, and then he made the genius move of directing the whole thing himself. Problem was, he'd never actually made an animated movie before, at all. They started working on it back in 2000. Threshold and a Korean investment group threw in about $25 million up front, figuring international pre-sales would cover the rest. Then in 2002, somebody literally stole all their hard drives right in the middle of production. And no joke, they didn't have backups. All that work gone. So Kasanoff said, hey, perfect time to switch to motion capture animation, which he also knew nothing about. This guy apparently would walk into the animation studio and literally just say stuff like, make it 30% better, or make this more awesome. He had no clue how animation even worked. Couldn't even tell texturing from modeling. Meanwhile, he was promising investors that Food Fight would be the next Pixar. He even talked about doing spin-off web episodes, toys, books. He wanted a Food Fight ice skating show. Seriously. Somehow, he convinced even more investors to hand him another $20 million in 2005. Lionsgate picked up the rights in the US, but after missing release dates 2 years straight, they had enough and walked away. Investors took control, handed the mess over to an insurance company who basically just rushed through what little animation was left as cheaply as possible. They finally dumped the movie at an auction for a couple million bucks. When it eventually came out, mostly straight to DVD, it made a grand total of $73,000 at the box office. $73,000 on a movie that cost $65 million. Absolutely incredible disaster. And then we've got Tomorrowland, Disney's big attempt to make a movie based on their own theme park area. They got George Clooney, Brad Bird directing. He actually turned down Star Wars Episode 7 for this. Damon Lindelof writing. Disney expected this thing to become a huge franchise, pouring almost $200 million into it and another $150 million in marketing. The whole movie was wrapped in secrecy. Typical J.J. Abrams-style hype. It worked during their Lost era, so they figured it would work again here. Problem was, there wasn't really any big secret, no real twist. It was just kind of bland and confusing. Audiences couldn't figure out if it was for kids or adults, critics were mixed, and nobody really knew what to make of it. Disney delayed the movie multiple times before finally releasing it on Memorial Day weekend against that Poltergeist remake. Opening weekend was weak, but there was still some hope. There were no family-targeting movies opening for another month until Disney's Inside Out. Tomorrowland was expected to play well over the upcoming weeks, but it sank 57% in its second frame. By the time it left theaters, Tomorrowland barely cleared $200 million worldwide. Not nearly enough after theater cuts and marketing costs. It ended up losing Disney at least $140 million. If Brad Bird hadn't followed this up with Incredibles 2, his career might have been toast. Honestly, Tomorrowland is one of the most disappointing big-budget disasters in Disney history. So these two brothers, sons of one of the original Rocky producers, started a studio called Summertime Entertainment. Their big plan was to make an animated Oz sequel with big-name voice actors like Patrick Stewart, Lea Michele, Kelsey Grammer. Sounds okay on paper, right? Not exactly. They raised their $70 million budget from over 1,000 random investors, convincing them this movie would gross somewhere between $720 million and $2 billion. Yeah, billion. Somehow, people actually believed it, handed over their money, and the brothers pocketed $15 million just for themselves. And the movie was, of course, an absolute disaster. Nobody saw it. Barely made $20 million, theaters pulled it almost immediately, and investors freaked out, started ranting online about conspiracy theories, saying studios purposely sabotaged it. Summertime entertainment went belly up after just this one movie, and honestly, good riddance. Warner Brothers really thought they had something special here. Directed by Bryan Singer, written by Christopher McQuarrie, starring Nicholas Hoult, Ewan McGregor, Stanley Tucci. You get the idea. Huge Hollywood talent. But everything that could go wrong went wrong. The movie had a crazy high budget to begin with, almost $200 million. But they ran into trouble in post-production thanks to Digital Domain, the visual effects company working on it. These guys totally lowballed their bid to get the gig, then found themselves way over their heads with the effects. Things got so bad, their own employees called the movie Jack the Company Killer. Digital Domain was trying out new software and it totally backfired. They had to redo entire scenes and eventually they went completely bankrupt, though they did manage to stick around just long enough to help mess up Ender's Game too. Warner Brothers moved Jack around the calendar until finally dumping it right before Oz the Great and Powerful, which was basically going after the same audience. Predictably, Oz took most of the crowd. Jack the Giant Slayer ended up making $197 million worldwide, not even close to breaking even. After marketing and theater cuts, it lost about $140 million, one of the biggest money losers ever. Bryan Singer was pretty lucky. He had X-Men Days of Future Past lined up after this, because otherwise his career would have been done right then and there. Remember when Robert Zemeckis made hit after hit in the 80s and 90s? Well, he hasn't exactly kept that streak going lately. Welcome to Marwen is a perfect example. This was supposed to be a big emotional drama, based on a true story about an artist named Mark Hogenkamp. He gets attacked by white supremacists, loses most of his memory, and ends up creating a whole imaginary town out of miniatures to cope. Universal bought the rights, put Zemeckis in charge, and cast Steve Carell as the lead. On paper, sounds like it could be an Oscar movie, right? Except Zemeckis kept piling on weird CGI motion capture sequences, turning what could have been a moving drama into something nobody really understood. Seriously, this is Zemeckis at his worst, going overboard with technology and cheap sentiment, which has pretty much become his thing in recent years. The studio sunk a ton into marketing, like around $40 million in the US alone. Then they released it on one of the most crowded weekends of the year, up against Aquaman, Bumblebee, and Mary Poppins Returns. First weekend numbers, 9th place again, with barely $2 million, ended up at $12.9 million worldwide, off a $40 million budget. Just another embarrassing flop for Zemeckis, who hasn't been able to really land a solid hit in years. The promise was supposed to be this big, important epic about the Armenian genocide. Billionaire Kirk Kerkorian spent decades dreaming about making it happen. He even worked on the casting, started setting things up, but then he passed away before they got to film it. After he died, his company spun off a whole new production arm just to make this one movie. Budget? $90 million. For an independent film, that's a ridiculous amount of money. So they go out and get Christian Bale and Oscar Isaac, set up this big historical love triangle in the last days of the Ottoman Empire. Sounds prestigious, right? Wrong. First screening at the Toronto Film Festival, what happens? Overnight, it gets review bombed. 70,000 bad reviews on IMDb and other sites. And get this, turns out, reportedly, a lot of those were from Turkish government trolls, because Turkey still denies the Armenian genocide officially, and they didn't like this movie existing. And of course, no major studio wanted to touch it, because all these huge studios are owned by giant global corporations who don't want to tick off Turkey either. So they had to settle for distribution through Open Road, where the filmmakers basically paid their own way just to get it released. Reviews came out, and nobody really cared that much. Mixed at best. Opening weekend, 9th place. Barely over $4 million. Total US gross, just over $8 million. Final global tally, just $12.4 million. Against a budget of $90. After marketing expenses, total losses were over $90 million. All proceeds went to charity, but let's face it, there weren't exactly many proceeds left to give. And then we have Missing Link. You've got Leica Studios, who've done great stuff like Coraline. But every movie after that has been less successful than the last. So for some reason, Leica decided to spend $100 million on this stop-motion animated movie about an explorer helping Bigfoot find his long-lost relatives. They got a huge voice cast. Hugh Jackman, Emma Thompson, Timothy Olyphant, and even won a Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature. But did that matter? Not in the slightest. Audiences didn't show up. Critics liked it well enough, but the marketing was bad. Nobody really knew who the movie was even made for. It was Leica's first movie without a kid as the main character, so it probably didn't click with younger audiences. And since it was animated and kind of quirky, older viewers didn't exactly rush to see it either. Leica didn't even have the same studio behind them anymore to push it. When Missing Link opened, nobody noticed. It barely made $5 million opening weekend. Worldwide, only $26.5 million total on a $100 million budget. Deadline estimated the movie lost $100 million once everything was added up. Pretty painful. But hey, at least they won a Golden Globe, right?